A homeless man stumbled into a meeting he should never have seen. 3 weeks later, Israeli intelligence turned him into a walking surveillance device. The technology hidden inside his mouth would either stop the deadliest attack Europe had seen in decades or get him killed in the most brutal way imaginable. November 1999 brought an unusual chill to Berlin, where intelligence agencies from 6 nations maintained operations disguised as cultural centers and import businesses throughout the former eastern sectors that still bore scars from Cold War division. The Mossad maintained 3 operational safehouses in the city, staffed by agents who had spent years building cover identities that allowed them to monitor extremist cells, moving weapons and personnel through Germany's porous borders with Poland and the Czech Republic, where organized crime networks had established smuggling routes that terrorist organizations increasingly exploited. Tariq Nasser had arrived 6 months earlier under diplomatic cover as a cultural attaché at the Israeli embassy, coordinating surveillance operations targeting Hassan al-Rifai, a Syrian national who had entered Germany on a forged Lebanese passport and established what appeared to be a legitimate textile import business, but whom Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv had identified through intercepted communications as a logistics coordinator for attacks being planned across multiple European capitals for the approaching millennium celebrations. Markus Weber had not always lived in the abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath Alexanderplatz, where the cold November rain could not reach him, but where rats grew bold enough to approach sleeping bodies in search of food scraps. 14 years earlier, he had worked as an electrical engineer for Siemens, designing circuit boards for telecommunications equipment and earning enough to support his wife and daughter in a comfortable apartment in Charlottenburg. But alcoholism triggered by his daughter's death in a car accident, divorce, bankruptcy from medical bills, and the economic chaos following reunification had stripped away every anchor connecting him to his former life. He had been living on the streets for 3 years when he sought shelter from a rainstorm in what he thought was an abandoned warehouse near the Spree River, descending a rusted staircase into a basement where his engineering background immediately recognized sophisticated radio equipment, maps marked with surveillance points and target locations, and stacks of forged German and French identity documents that could only mean he had stumbled into an operational cell requiring absolute secrecy. The Mossad had been tracking Hassan al-Rifai for 8 months, through signals intelligence revealing communications between Berlin and Damascus, Paris and Beirut, communications using code phrases referring to shipments and deliveries, but which pattern analysis suggested indicated planning for coordinated attacks timed to coincide with millennium celebrations that would draw massive crowds to public squares across Europe. Tariq Nasser had assembled a team of 6 agents for surveillance operations, but German counterintelligence had become increasingly suspicious of foreign intelligence activities on their territory, which meant traditional methods of electronic surveillance and physical tracking carried unacceptable risks of exposure and diplomatic incident that could compromise not just this operation, but Mossad's entire European network. The agency needed someone who could get physically close to al-Rifai's inner circle, someone disposable enough that their loss would create no international complications, someone invisible to both German authorities and the terrorist cell's security protocols, someone whose presence in places where homeless people congregated would arouse no suspicion even in neighborhoods where al-Rifai's people conducted business. Markus Weber made the mistake of running when Hassan al-Rifai's lieutenant, Sergei Makarov, emerged from a back room and spotted the intruder standing near the radio equipment. Weber made it halfway up the stairs before Makarov's hand closed on his collar, dragging him back down and locking him in a storage closet while making phone calls in Arabic that Weber could not understand. 6 hours passed in darkness before Makarov returned with 2 other men, questioned Weber about who he was and who had sent him, and seemed convinced by Weber's genuine terror that he was exactly what he appeared to be, a homeless drunk who had chosen the wrong building to escape the rain. They threw him into the street with a warning that returning would mean death, but not before Sergei Makarov photographed Weber's face. What neither the terrorist cell nor Markus Weber knew was that Tariq Nasser's surveillance team had installed thermal imaging cameras covering every entrance to the warehouse 3 weeks earlier. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv had reviewed footage of Weber being dragged inside, held prisoner, then released alive instead of killed, which suggested something their psychological profiles indicated could be exploited. Someone who had been inside the enemy facility and survived. Someone whose presence on the streets made him invisible. Someone desperate enough to accept any offer that promised escape from homelessness and hunger. Khaled Ben Ami received the encrypted message from Tarek Nasser at 4 in the morning while working in the technical laboratory beneath the Israeli embassy. The request seemed impossible. Design and build a functional audio surveillance device small enough to implant inside a human tooth. Make it transmit clear audio across at least 500 meters. Give it battery life of at least 72 hours. Complete the project in less than 2 weeks. The prototype Ben Ami delivered 9 days later looked like a standard dental crown, but its ceramic shell contained a microphone smaller than a grain of rice, a transmitter using burst technology to send encrypted audio packets every 30 seconds, and a lithium battery weighing less than 20 milligrams. Installation required drilling into a healthy tooth, inserting the device and sealing it with dental cement. Removal would require professional equipment. Failure while implanted would leave Weber with dead electronics permanently sealed inside his jaw. Tarek Nasser found Marcus Weber sleeping beneath the Alexanderplatz platform 11 days after the warehouse incident. Weber's initial response was suspicion and fear, but when Nasser offered 5,000 Deutschmarks just for listening to a proposal, resistance collapsed. The deal was simple. Allow Mossad to implant a listening device in his tooth. Allow them to stage a scenario where Al-Rifai's organization would recruit him as a low-level asset to run errands and carry messages. Spend 2 to 3 weeks getting close enough to record planning conversations. In exchange, 50,000 Deutschmarks, a new identity, relocation assistance to any country he chose, and protection from both terrorists and German authorities. Weber returned 16 hours later and agreed to every term, including the one that meant, if his cover was compromised, Mossad could not extract him or acknowledge his existence. The dental procedure took place in a clinic Khaled Ben Ami converted from a safehouse apartment. Weber sat in a modified chair, while Ben Ami administered anesthetic and drilled slowly through enamel and dentin. The device slid into place with millimeter precision. Dental cement sealed over it in layers, each hardened with ultraviolet light. When complete, Weber's mouth contained what looked like a perfectly normal crown that would not attract attention, but which carried inside it the capacity to transmit every conversation within 3 meters directly to Mossad receivers. Activation tests 30 minutes later confirmed crystal clarity. Battery indicator showed 76 hours estimated operational life. Marcus Weber had become a walking surveillance device. The next phase required making Hassan al-Rifai's organization believe recruiting Weber was their idea. 5 days after the implant procedure, a Turkish courier from al-Rifai's textile business offered Weber 20 Deutschmarks to deliver a package to Kreuzberg. Simple errands established him as reliable and desperate enough to ask no questions. Over 6 days, the device transmitted every conversation while Weber ran courier jobs, building maps of the network, and identifying patterns that suggested the cell was avoiding electronic communications entirely. The breakthrough came December 8th, when Sergei Makarov personally approached Weber and asked if he wanted to earn real money. Makarov led him to a secure apartment containing radio equipment, maps, and 4 men whose focused attention suggested operational importance. Hassan al-Rifai sat reviewing documents in Arabic. For 15 seconds, al-Rifai studied Weber with eyes calculating threat and value. When he spoke, his German carried slight accent. He asked direct questions about Weber's background, homelessness, willingness to work for people requiring absolute silence, his understanding that betrayal meant consequences worse than anything police could do. The device transmitted every word to receivers 800 meters away. Tarek Nasser listened, while Khaled Ben Ami monitored signal strength. Hassan al-Rifai nodded slowly and told Makarov that Weber could be useful. There was work coming in exactly 23 days when the world celebrated the year 2000. Not one attack, multiple attacks, coordinated across 3 capitals, Paris, Berlin, Rome, chemical agents, not explosives, something that would kill thousands before anyone understood what was happening. The transmission suddenly cut to static for 3 seconds. Khalid Ben-Ami went pale, checking diagnostics, battery draining faster than projected. Instead of 76 hours, they had less than 60 before complete failure. Hassan al-Rifai kept talking. The countdown had begun. Hassan al-Rifai spread 3 maps across the table, while Marcus Weber stood near the door, pretending not to understand the red circles marking metro stations and public squares in Paris, Berlin and Rome, where crowds would gather on December 31st to celebrate the millennium. Crowds that would become kill zones when operatives released VX nerve agent simultaneously across 3 time zones in attacks timed to maximize death toll and media coverage broadcast live worldwide. Sergei Makarov explained Weber's job would be simple but critical, delivering packages containing specialized spray equipment to 3 separate Berlin locations during the week before attacks. Equipment disguised as cleaning supplies that could pass casual inspection, but which contained pressurized canisters designed to disperse nerve agent across areas covering approximately 500 square meters per device. The Russian emphasized Weber would never touch chemical agents themselves, only delivery mechanisms, which meant even if German police stopped him, they would find nothing immediately suspicious. Tarek Nasser listened through the transmission while coordinating with analysts in Tel Aviv, already running attack simulations based on information flowing through the device. The intelligence revealed not just target locations, but operational timelines, personnel assignments, and critically that Hassan al-Rifai's cell was receiving chemical agents through smuggling networks, moving weapons-grade materials from former Soviet facilities through Poland into Western Europe, using routes established by organized crime syndicates. The transmission revealed the first shipment of VX precursor chemicals had entered Germany 3 days earlier, stored in a warehouse location al-Rifai mentioned only in passing, but which surveillance teams immediately began trying to identify. Weber had been embedded less than 3 hours and already provided intelligence that could prevent the deadliest terrorist attack in European history, but the device was consuming battery at rates suggesting perhaps 55 hours of operational life remained. Hassan al-Rifai's next statement changed mission parameters completely. Weber would need to stay in the apartment for the next 4 days, sleeping on the floor with 3 other couriers, while final preparations were completed, because movement in and out created security risks that could not be tolerated during the critical phase when chemical agents were being positioned and dispersed equipment tested. Weber had no choice but to agree, which meant isolation inside the terrorist cell's headquarters, with no opportunity to meet Nasser for debriefing, no way to receive updated instructions, and critically, no ability to recharge or replace the device sealed inside his tooth. Khalid Ben-Ami ran battery projections through 3 analytical models and reached the same conclusion each time. Under continuous transmission with Weber confined where conversations would be ongoing throughout waking hours, the device would achieve perhaps 48 hours before voltage dropped below threshold for encrypted transmission. They could extend battery slightly by reducing transmission frequency from every 30 seconds to every 60, but making that adjustment remotely was impossible because the device had been designed as a passive system with no ability to receive external commands. NASA decided to accept whatever battery life they achieved, reasoning 48 hours of continuous intelligence from inside headquarters was worth more than months of external surveillance that had failed to penetrate security or identify the warehouse. Over 6 hours transmitted through Weber's tooth, analysts constructed detailed profiles revealing sophistication far beyond what previous intelligence suggested. Al-Rifai was managing a network extending across 7 countries, with access to former Soviet chemical weapons specialists, European nationals radicalized through online recruitment, and most disturbing, at least 2 individuals with emergency medical response backgrounds who understood exactly how VX exposure would affect human bodies and had calculated dosages designed to overwhelm hospital capacity by producing casualties faster than medical systems could respond. Conversations revealed December 31st. Attacks were demonstration events meant to prove capability rather than inflict maximum casualties, with larger operations planned for spring 2000 if millennium attacks succeeded in creating required psychological impact. Sergei Makarov pulled Weber aside near midnight and explained what would happen if Weber tried to leave or contacted authorities or did anything suggesting disloyalty. Makarov described in detail what they had done to the last person who betrayed operational security, a Turkish courier caught stealing who tried trading information for leniency from prosecutors. The Russian's description was specific and clinical, focusing on techniques designed to maximize suffering while keeping victims conscious long enough to regret betrayal. The transmission carried enough detail that Tarek Nasser felt physically ill imagining what would happen to Weber if anyone discovered the device sealed inside his jaw. Battery indicator showed 41 hours estimated life remaining. When Hassan al-Rifai announced Weber would make his first delivery the following morning, carrying a package to an address in Kreuzberg, that analysis immediately identified as a medical supply warehouse robbed 6 months earlier. A robbery attributed to common theft, but which now appeared to be reconnaissance for acquiring equipment needed to store and transport temperature-sensitive chemical agents. The transmission provided exact address, contact name, and critically reference to inspection protocols, suggesting the warehouse contained not just delivery equipment, but possibly the agents themselves, stored properly while awaiting final distribution to 3 operatives who would deploy them during Millennium celebrations, now exactly 23 days away. Tarek Nasser had to decide whether to allow Marcus Weber to make the delivery, knowing it would take him directly to what might be primary storage for weapons-grade chemical agents, or abort by extracting Weber and losing the only intelligence source providing real-time access to al-Rifai's planning. Extraction meant Weber disappeared overnight, immediately alerting the cell to compromise and forcing them to abandon current plans and scatter. Allowing delivery meant accepting Weber was actively participating in facilitating terrorist attack with no legal protection if intercepted, and no way for Mossad to intervene without exposing operations on German soil. Weber's first delivery was scheduled for 0800 hours. 37 hours of battery life remained. Marcus Weber left the apartment at 0745, carrying a package that felt heavier than previous deliveries. Sergei Makarov had walked him through the route 3 times, emphasizing deviation would be interpreted as betrayal, that the Kreuzberg warehouse contact expected delivery at precisely 0830, and Weber should not attempt conversation beyond confirming package contents. The device transmitted every instruction, while Tarek Nasser coordinated surveillance teams to track Weber's movement without compromising his cover, teams positioned at intersections, who would photograph everyone Weber encountered and every vehicle following him. Intelligence allowing Mossad to map al-Rifai's full network, even if the battery died before mission completion. The warehouse sat at the end of an industrial street, lined with similar buildings converted from manufacturing into storage after reunification. Weber approached where a man matching Makarov's description stood smoking, someone too well-dressed and physically fit to be working storage at 0830 on a cold December morning. The contact introduced himself as Dmitri, took the package without opening it, and asked if Weber wanted to see what his deliveries were helping accomplish, a question designed to test loyalty or curiosity. Nasser, listening, felt his pulse accelerate, knowing whatever Weber saw could either provide final intelligence pieces or expose him as infiltrator. Dmitri led Marcus Weber past rows of legitimate medical supplies, including oxygen tanks and surgical equipment that provided cover for the facility's actual purpose, which became clear when they descended into a basement where temperature-controlled rooms maintained precise conditions required to store VX precursor chemicals without degradation. The room contained 12 pressurized cylinders marked with hazard symbols. Weber's engineering background recognized as extremely toxic, cylinders connected to commercially available garden sprayers, modified with electronic timing and remote activation, allowing operatives to position devices hours before attacks, arm them remotely, and detonate simultaneously across 3 cities without requiring suicide attackers. Dmitri explained each device could cover 500 square meters with lethal nerve agent concentrations. Testing confirmed death within 90 seconds of exposure, and medical treatment would be ineffective because hospitals did not stock sufficient atropine for mass casualty events on the scale they were planning. The transmission provided analysts everything needed to identify warehouse location, confirm weapons-grade chemical agents' presence, document dispersal mechanism design, and understand attack methodology, allowing devices positioned in metro stations and public squares disguised as maintenance equipment days before December 31st. Battery monitoring showed 31 hours operational life remaining, which meant the device would die approximately 36 hours before planned attacks, leaving critical window where al-Rifai could make final preparations without Mossad having real-time intelligence. NASA had coordinated with German counterterrorism through back channels, providing just enough information to justify surveillance warrants and raid preparation without revealing intelligence source, or that a Mossad asset currently stood in basement containing enough VX to kill thousands. Marcus Weber made a mistake when Dmitry asked what he thought about their plans, and Weber responded with too much technical detail about dispersal patterns and environmental factors affecting nerve agent effectiveness, knowledge a homeless courier should not possess. Dmitry's expression changed from pride to suspicion. He asked where Weber learned about chemical weapons. Weber recovered, explaining his electrical engineering background, claiming he had worked on ventilation systems and understood how airborne contaminants spread, but the explanation felt weak. Dmitry studied Weber's face for 15 seconds before appearing to accept the story, but body language suggested doubt remained. The device transmitted Dmitry telling Weber to return immediately and not discuss what he had seen with anyone, including Makarov, instructions suggesting either compartmentalized security or that Dmitry intended to report Weber's suspicious technical knowledge to al-Rifai. Marcus Weber walked through morning crowds feeling the device in his tooth, like physical presence that could be detected. Knowing his engineering knowledge had nearly exposed him, wondering if Dmitry was already making calls that would result in interrogation and torture. Tarek Nasser decided extraction was mandatory, that remaining intelligence was not worth risk, that Weber would be identified as Mossad asset and tortured into revealing operational details, compromising the entire network. The problem was extracting Weber required getting him out of the apartment, where he was supposed to remain isolated 3 days, away from Makarov and other couriers who would notice absence within minutes. The device had 29 hours battery remaining. German units were preparing to raid warehouse in 18 hours, attack scheduled for 22 days. The transmission suddenly included new voices, people speaking Russian and Arabic. That translation software processed in real time, revealing Hassan al-Rifai had received warning from a source inside German police that surveillance had increased around known locations, that counterintelligence suspected foreign operations, and that security required moving to backup locations and accelerating timelines. Al-Rifai was ordering chemical agents moved from Kreuzberg warehouse within 6 hours. The window for police to raid and seize VX was collapsing. Marcus Weber was trapped inside apartment with people who might already suspect betrayal. The device kept transmitting while battery dropped toward threshold where encrypted communication would fail. Tarek Nasser had 18 minutes before Hassan al-Rifai moved the chemical agents, and the device was transmitting conversations showing Dmitry had reported suspicions to Sergei Makarov, who was questioning why a homeless courier possessed technical knowledge inconsistent with his cover. Battery voltage was dropping, introducing static bursts, but analysts could hear Makarov saying they needed to verify Weber's background before allowing additional deliveries. Marcus Weber understood danger when Makarov pulled him into separate room asking detailed questions about his Siemens employment history, questions specific enough that incorrect answers would expose him. Battery showed 23 hours estimated life, but voltage fluctuations suggested faster degradation. The device captured Makarov calling in Russian to verify Weber's work history. Hassan al-Rifai ordered Makarov to execute Weber without waiting for verification. Reasoning minimal suspicion justified eliminating potential threat. The transmission carried exact words, telling Makarov to make death appear like overdose, dispose body in Spree River, and do it within 2 hours before vehicles arrived to transport agents from Kreuzberg warehouse to backup location. Nasser initiated extraction, knowing it would expose operations but accepting that allowing execution was not an option. The team moved toward apartment as telecommunications workers carrying equipment concealing weapons. The problem was extraction required knowing Weber's exact position, and the device provided only audio. Weber felt Makarov's hand close on his arm. Makarov told him they were going for a drive. Weber understood what that meant. The device transmitted his protest. Makarov's response was cold, explaining Weber had demonstrated knowledge inconsistent with cover. The transmission carried Weber being pushed toward door, breathing accelerating, then silence as Makarov struck him. NASA gave extraction order knowing it was too late. Weber was being moved before the team could reach position. The device transmitted from inside vehicle, street noise and engine sounds and conversation between Makarov and driver, who knew routes avoiding cameras. Battery showed 19 hours estimated life, voltage approaching failure threshold. The transmission suddenly included screeching tires and impact shock and German police sirens. Counterterrorism had initiated raids simultaneously based on intelligence Mossad provided, and one team intercepted Makarov's vehicle. The device transmitted chaos, shouting in German and Russian, commands to exit with hands visible. German units had Weber in custody. They also had Makarov. Kreuzberg warehouse raid happened simultaneously, teams breaching 40 minutes before Al-Rifai's vehicles arrived. The raid recovered 12 cylinders containing VX precursor chemicals sufficient for 30 liters of weapons-grade agent, dispersal equipment modified for remote activation, and documents detailing targets in Paris, Berlin and Rome for December 31st attacks during millennium celebrations. Hassan al-Rifai escaped by 15 minutes, tracked toward Polish border, where he disappeared into smuggling networks. Mossad spent 3 years locating him before Damascus operation eliminated him in 2002 during strikes against Syrian intelligence facilities. Sergei Makarov received life sentence from German court in trial that avoided mentioning Israeli intelligence involvement. Marcus Weber spent 11 days in German custody during debriefing, requiring coordination between counterintelligence and Mossad handlers who could not acknowledge their relationship without diplomatic incident. Khaled Ben-Ami extracted dental device during medical examination, arranged through back channels, ensuring authorities never knew it existed. Weber received 50,000 Deutschmarks promised, plus 20,000 NASA authorized as compensation for days. Weber believed he might be prosecuted as accomplice rather than recognized as asset-preventing attacks that would have killed thousands. Weber used money to relocate to Vienna, establishing small electronics repair business providing income and anonymity, allowing him to rebuild life he had lost to alcoholism and grief. NASA returned to Tel Aviv, receiving commendation, but also reprimand for exposing assets without authorization, ending his field career and moving him to analytical work. Ben-Ami continued developing miniaturized surveillance technology, with dental device evolving into systems implantable in bone tissue and subcutaneous layers. December 31st millennium celebrations across Europe proceeded without incident, with millions gathering unaware they had been 3 weeks from attacks that would have transformed celebrations into mass casualty events. Marcus Weber died in 2004 from heart failure brought by decades of alcoholism that 4 years of sobriety could not reverse, dying in hospital with money for proper burial but no family to attend because relatives never forgave years of self-destruction following his daughter's death. NASA learned of Weber's death through routine monitoring Mossad maintained years after operations concluded and arranged flowers sent to funeral from anonymous source. The flowers arrived with card containing 5 words in German. "You saved thousands of lives." No one else at small funeral understood what those words meant, or why someone believed a man who spent final years repairing radios and televisions in small Vienna shop deserved recognition for saving lives he never met, and who would never know survival depended on a homeless courier willing to carry listening device inside his tooth into heart of terrorist cell planning, the deadliest attack Europe never saw.